thank you ever so much for joining us this morning for the Critical Minerals Association webinar. And this morning, we're going to be talking about the newly released UK critical minerals strategy called Future Resilience. I like it, there's stuff to be done, but to discuss it in more detail, I'm joined by three panelists, two at the moment and Lucy, when the school run has not or stopped being such chaos as it is for all of us in the mornings. Lucy will be joining us as well. So I'm joined by Dennis and Guy. Dennis from Cornwall Resources, Guy from Fasken. I'll let each one of those do an introduction about who they are, Lucy when she joins as well, and we'll take it from there. Okay, so Dennis, first off.
Hi, I'm Dennis. I'm Senior Geologist and Project Manager at Cornwall Resources. Cornwall Resources is the operating company for the Redmoor Tin Tungsten Copper project in Cornwall. CRL is wholly owned by Strategic Minerals, who are listed on AIM. We have an 11.7 million ton resource inferred at 1.17% tin equivalent. And through 2 years of drilling, we've achieved that so far, and we're hoping to keep going with that project.
Excellent, thank you. And Guy, over to you.
Morning, everyone. I'm Guy Winter. I'm an energy and natural resources partner at Fasken, which is a global resources law firm with offices in London, Canada, South Africa, and Beijing. I'm also a member of BASE's expert committee on critical minerals. I feel like with the events of the last week or so, it's important to stress that we only advise Kwasi Kwarteng on critical minerals and not on the sort of points of fiscal policy that he's now been looking at more recently.
Brilliant, thank you, Guy. And Lucy's just joined, and Lucy, you've managed to do the school run and survived, as we all have just about this morning. So Lucy, I'll hand over to you quickly to say who you are and where you're from.
Well, thanks, Jeff. And yeah, apologies for everybody for being slightly late. My name's Lucy Crane. I'm a geologist by training, and I work for a company called Cornish Lithium. So we're exploring for lithium and other decarbonising metals down here in the southwest of England. My role within the company now is ESG and Sustainability Manager. So very much a core part of the company's ethos is trying to do things in the most responsible way possible. And I see the ESG team, our role within the company is trying to ensure that we are actually living up to and building our projects in the most responsible way.
Excellent. Thank you, Lucy. Right, well, now we're all here. 1 second, my computer's going mad. I guess what we should start with is then discussing about the critical mineral strategy, having a look at it. If you ask me, I think it's very top line, but I do think it's a good step in the right direction. So I'd like to get your kind of overall thoughts before we dive into some of the detail, what your general thoughts are, how you think it stacks up. So over to who am I going to get to first, and then we'll kick it off. Dennis, as we started with you, we'll start with you again. Go for it.
It's a good, as you said, it's a good start. I think it's trying to bring together a lot of competing themes into 10 points, which I think has meant that it has had to be quite low on detail to begin with. It doesn't set itself a huge amount of set goals within the strategy, but hopefully that comes out in any follow-up. The only 2 goals I've seen so far are a data goal for March next year and some intergovernmental discussions on who does what bit of work. So hopefully there are significant follow-up to flesh out this in the near future.
Yeah, agreed. Guy, Lucy, any thoughts?
So, sorry, Lucy, after you have anything. I guess it's really important when we're kind of evaluating the strategy to consider what it was solving for. So if you kind of look at the perception in the UK, people were very excited about energy transition, but probably with a very limited concept of what that meant in terms of the incredibly complex supply chains that sat beneath that. We've also been through, Brexit, which has complicated those supply chain issues very considerably in the sense of introducing considerations like rules of origin for trade between the UK and the EU. So actually, the holistic view of these supply chains and the many issues that need to be tackled, I think to get an overview of that was extremely important. And in order for that to resonate, it probably also had to be done on a pretty timely basis. I think if you try to tackle such an intricate value chain and to implement detailed plans for everything all in one go, for a start, you've got a 2,000-page document, and it's probably going to take you a couple of years. So I think it's important, whilst it's right that we should continue to push for the deliverables, just as Dennis says, I think it's a really good start to have this kind of holistic overview. And actually, when you look at developments like, interestingly, today, Rachel Reeves is announcing a new National Wealth Fund. We now actually have a body of work that we can set against some of the objectives that Labour would be setting, and ask where exactly that money is going to go. Is it just going to go to gigafactories, or will they look at the wider value chain? And I think the immense amount of work that BASE has done will bear fruits as we move forward.
Yeah, Lucy, over to you.
Yeah, well, just to build on what both Dennis and Guy have said, I think it's a great kind of intention setting, and it marks a big difference to how the government perhaps viewed critical minerals and how important they are underpinning all of this energy transition and the rest of society. And, you know, a few years ago, they weren't really on their radar at all. So I think it marks a really big important step change from that perspective. As you say, slightly light on the details of how it's going to be delivered at the moment. But I was particularly encouraged to see that the talent pipeline is one of the things that's mentioned, because it's kind of a multi-pronged approach, isn't it? We've got this immediate need for critical minerals. We've got an immediate need to get graduates to come and study mining-related industry and vocational degrees. But then there's that whole longer-term view as well. And I think it's great that they talk about creating an enabling environment for domestic projects, as well as trying to use the UK's leadership in ESG and doing things properly on projects internationally as well. So I think it's a great opportunity for us as an industry to help shape what this actually looks like and what we think is actually realistic to deliver. But also perhaps, as we've had a recent change in leadership at the government, perhaps this is something that they can actually take away and run with as well. I don't know if we're expecting to see any change in this critical minerals strategy or any more focus on it now that the government's changed, but it will be interesting to see how it pans out.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, everyone. Well, look, I think starting with that last point and then moving back, if you look at it a different way, the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, went to Cornwall and visited projects in Cornwall to discuss critical minerals. Kwasi Kwarteng, who's now the Chancellor, visited critical mineral projects around Cornwall when he was Bayes Secretary of State. The now head of the Cabinet Office and bringing departments together, Nadeem Zahawi, he's met numerous critical mineral companies. So actually at the Secretary of State for Transport, I don't know how that helps, but EVs potentially, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, huge fan of critical minerals. So I think actually, and from the discussions I've had, I know they've already been discussed at cabinet level. So there is now at the top a big number of the leaders who are into this sector and understand its importance. I think you're absolutely right in that it's just trying to do so much. You know, we might be missing a bit of the detail, like you said, Guy and Dennis, and how do we deliver that? And I guess the starting point for that is all about context, isn't it? So the strategy is set in the context of the critical minerals that have been identified by the newly created Critical Mineral Intelligence Centre. I'll be honest, I still have a few questions about that and the way that critical minerals are defined, but then I am me. Does anyone else have any thoughts about the critical mineral list that we now have, about anything that's on there that shouldn't be, or anything that's probably missing?
I think based on recent events, things like nickel should be on the list. Maybe like aluminium as well, since aluminium's on the US, Australia, EU, and Canadian lists. Yeah, I think especially those two. There's probably many others as well. I think. Go on, Lucy.
Sorry, Dennis.
That's okay.
Isn't it? Jumping in, really jumping in when you're on a webinar. But you know, things like copper as well. There's the big copper is so vital, and there's that World Bank statistic that we'll go back to, that we need as much copper in the next 25 years as we have done in the previous 5,000. And you know, we have some copper resources domestically, whether they're economic, I'm not sure. They may well be. But what can we do proactively to secure these supplies to the country, rather than waiting and sitting for things to happen perhaps before then thinking, oh God, how do we go and struggle along with everybody else to get this all sorted?
Yeah.
And I think the other thing, sorry
Lucy.
the other thing, these are critical metal. Well, they're not all critical metals. You've got things like silicon, but the industrial minerals industry is actually really important to the UK as well. And I think it's something that's sometimes missed out of the conversation. We've got amazing mining and minerals expertise within the industrial minerals sector in the UK as well. And a lot of these are very critical to our society as we know it. So perhaps that's something that needs to be worked in and more involved as this project all develops.
Thank you. I mean, a couple of things. I guess the first is, it's interesting because one of the weightings that was applied was how well the market operates to deliver. Because if you think about one of the big concerns, if you take rare earths, for example, it's the distortion in the market caused by the kind of macro political operation of that kind of market. Whereas copper traditionally, for example, has kind of functioned more effectively in the open market, agreeing that there's a big squeeze, and also agreeing that there seems to be this assumption that, you know, Rio Tinto will basically deliver all the copper that we need at some point. And whether or not that's correct, you know, is probably a matter for a different debate. But also, I think it's really important to mention that there's a watch list. And so there's going to be an annual review of the critical minerals. And I think that's a really healthy process, because if you consider, for example, utility scale battery storage, there's already been a big rebalancing in terms of the minerals that are likely to be most constrained. So the scarcity in themselves of cobalt, for example, has led to more LFP batteries, which in turn is going to put more squeeze probably on manganese as we move forward. So I think it is going to be important to be quite nimble in terms of keeping an eye on what are the critical minerals at any given point as the kind of technology moves on dynamically in the downstream markets.
Yeah, and that's not just changing the list though, but that's making sure the financing and help and assistance is as quick to change as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we're starting to see, globally at least, definitions of critical minerals also taking into account strategic necessity, which 5 years ago, this is critical because you need it and you can't build an economy. Now there's diplomatic weighting, there's security defense implications, etc. So we're starting to see a massive change in what is critical and what isn't. And part of me thinks that the list as it is may be slightly missing certain things, in that space. Whether that's intentional or not, I don't know. But it does seem to me like the way that the CMYK comes up with it is clever. It's, it does things, but there are certainly critical minerals missing that could be added in a year's time. And copper, I think, is a very big one. Okay, but I mean, generally though, we're happy with CMYK. We like the idea that there's the body out there that's doing this work, that's tracking what's coming in, coming out, starting to get an idea of actually. We're all supportive.
Yep, definitely.
Yes.
Go on, Lucy.
I was just going to say, it's just very difficult to do though, isn't it? I was lucky enough to go on a trip with UKRI to North America earlier in the year, looking at critical minerals and what is happening in that space in Canada and then over the border in the States. And it was really fascinating to see the different approaches that both Canada and America are taking to critical minerals and how that compares. And this was just before the strategy had come out for the UK. And, you know, in Canada, they're very good at research around primary, you know, the actual finding deposits and then mineral extraction. Whereas the impression I got in the States anyway was that they're looking very much into that kind of secondary processing steps. What can they do? They're not expecting to be able to produce a huge amount domestically because they think it's politically sensitive, which was interesting. But equally, they want to capture that refining step and then as much of the value chain as possible close to home, and are doing huge amounts of research around that, but also trying to track global material flows. And so there's perhaps quite a lot we can learn from collaboration with them. And Paul Lusty, who's heading up the Critical Minerals Intelligence Centre, was on that trip, and so he has some great ideas that they were bouncing around. But it'll be really interesting to see how it pans out, because then you marry that up the research that's already happening at places like Campbell's Gold Mines, University of Birmingham through this Met-Tech project. And there's a lot happening. It's just finding out who's doing what and where, and then bringing it all together.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that then is a nice segue, because if you look at the UK's critical mineral strategy, the government has taken what is a massive sector that, you know, is time sensitive, multiple constraints globally, geopolitically, and domestically. It's also taken into account a variety of speed and you know, things that are physical, things that are wrapping around that, like ESG, and it's tried to break it down into three kind of sections almost. So it's ACE, accelerate, collaborate, enhance. So why don't we try and work our way through those to see, you know, what our feeling as an industry is? Because, so let's take accelerate. So accelerate is all about how do we, it's not all about, but it's mostly about how do we develop the domestic offering in the critical mineral space. Mm-hmm. How do we make that globally or at least regionally competitive? And what do we need to do in that space? So I'm going to start with Guy, because yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think where it's actually at its strongest is probably around the sort of R&D aspects, and I think it's a very thrifty strategy. So it's very good at building on and drawing out the aspects that we already have, and that's immensely important. And I think, to Lucy's point, actually, and we'll come on to cooperation, but actually it's figuring out what the UK does well and how we can fit in to, you know, a really interesting collaboration between the strategically aligned nations, whether that's the Five Eyes or the sort of wider free world. But you know, clearly we need to figure out what we can bring to that. I mean, I'm going to kind of trigger Dennis a bit by picking out the expression signpost for financial support. I mean, obviously that is carefully chosen. That is essentially saying, listen, there's cash around. We may not necessarily give it to you directly off the back of this strategy, but, you know, we're going to try and facilitate that environment. And I think, you know, naturally that's an aspect that, you know, people in the city and in industry are going to focus on, because it is slightly lighter than some of the support that we've seen from IRMA. In fact, it's lighter than the support that Rachel Reeves has signposted today. So that's going to be a really interesting aspect, figuring out whether those signposts actually lead to pots of gold, or whether we shouldn't have a new pot, which actually sits more centrally within this strategy. And I'd like to think that that's a debate that we'll be having and we'll kind of get to, because there's all kinds of different structures for how government can effectively intervene in markets that don't operate properly to deliver the critical minerals we need.
And we're not reinventing the wheel on some of these again. without having to create new money, we can definitely make it easier for companies to operate, especially within the UK. You know, and Lucy's company have benefited from the IS scheme, where, you know, crowdfunded private companies can, you know, investors in those can offset some of their investments against their taxes. If that was available to some of the other companies operating in a more traditional sense, in a listed sense, that would be a great start. There are other pots of money that are available again, and well done to Lithium for managing to secure some funds through the Automotive Transformation Fund for more exploration focused work, rather than kind of, you know, the feasibility work that Cornish Lithium and British Lithium and those have managed to secure funds for. That's a good starting point. And again, kind of leads off of the, you know, picking what other countries do well in this, you know, offsetting investors' money, offsetting the R&D money that companies spend as well, and hopefully making domestic sourced production a little bit easier to achieve. So yeah, that's where I am on that one.
That's fair enough.
I suppose with the falling pound, we're becoming cheaper as well.
Always the optimist, Lucy.
Yeah, and I think there's perhaps more that can be done as well around, you know, it says we'll reduce barriers to domestic exploration and extraction of critical minerals. You know, realistically, one of what I see as the kind of selling points of doing this in the UK is the fact that we have got high environmental standards. We've got to deliver projects that are socially acceptable and social, you know, creating positive benefits for the communities around where we're working. So it is definitely a balance. How do we create a facilitating environment? And, you know, it's quite time critical bringing some of these domestic projects into production as well. You know, if we look at lithium, we want to bring lithium on stream in time to actually be useful for the battery mega factories that are going to be built. And then there's that whole, well, actually, do we need to map out the whole ecosystem domestically and see where the gaps are? And I think there is work being done for that. But again, going back to lithium, you actually then need someone who's going to make the cathode active material from the lithium before it can then go into your batteries. And I think it's a great first step by the government, this strategy. But as we said, the detail's going to be, the devil is in the detail, isn't it? Yeah. And from the point of somebody who's looking to actually bring projects into production now, there's obviously a lot of steps that you can't skip, but if we can be given support with what the planning and permitting processes are going to look like, for example, what's expected of us, rather than having to be iterative, let's produce something and then have the to and fro, you know, things like that could be really, really useful. And that's something that could be put in place now so that we all know what we're aiming for. So.
Yeah, and you know, for the planning side of things, making sure that system works at the time that it's supposed to work, and some of the delays that are brought through either through lack of experience in doing metal mining projects in the UK, or resistance from other groups, or political decisions, need to be worked out. And you know, if we say it takes X number of weeks to do a planning application, we really should be trying to stick to those to make these projects work. But then when we get to the accelerate part of the strategy, we've got, you know, the first point is looking at what we actually have in the UK.
Yep.
What do we have in the UK? What can we produce in the UK, and what do we need to do to actually help that? And that's the first deadline is, you know, by March 2023, we should have reviewed a national assessment of what critical minerals are in the UK. Well, there are, you know, a decent number of companies now operating in the UK. Have any of us heard from the BGS about this? I haven't. You know, should we be having engagement on what is what's the most likely things to be produced in the UK? Where are they? What can government through BGS and other institutions do to help those? And there's not much time left, and there's 6 months. So
yeah. I think, I mean, if I look at that accelerate part, they've got some 3 or 4 different parts, I think, within there that are quite, you know, interesting. So certainly, you know, tracking what critical minerals we have. Dennis, you're right. You know, now has the BGS got enough money? Has the BGS got enough manpower to actually do that effectively across the whole of the UK? No. The answer is no, it doesn't. So it has to pick its spots. And I know it recently went down to the southwest, but also I know it's got to focus on Aberdeenshire up in Scotland, which, so there's thoughts process around that, but it takes a long time to do it. And planning and processing is a big part of that as well. And this goes into a wider discussion, because something that's been constantly, people have asked me, is we actually have the technical ability, and we have some of the projects that are ready to go, and we have all of this information in place, but we have to take the historical steps that you need to get from exploration through to actual operation. 15 years. And the reality is that could probably be shrunk to 10, but there's ways that you have to facilitate that. And I was wondering, do you think there's enough in this strategy to accelerate from 15 years to 10 years, let's say?
I don't think there's
they follow
anything
through.
specific. Yeah.
Okay, if they follow through, if they're specific. I mean, okay. I mean, planning and permitting, that's one thing you could take a couple of years off, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and knowing
finance.
2 projects and finance. Yeah.
Right. If
yeah.
you
And then data as well. So, actually, one, do things like what Australia and Canada and Europe do, make that data available, make it easily accessible, make it free, or find a way of financing it, and do those pre-competitive data sets that de-risk projects before they even get started, and then help them get further developed quickly. That's what the BGS, his focus should be, make those projects work by developing data sets. They as part of the critical minerals list and the strategy that they've picked out areas, regional clusters, the southwest for tin, tungsten, lithium, and other areas of the UK. That area should therefore be a focus of developing data sets and assisting companies in getting further forward as quickly as possible. De-risk the project, therefore de-risking finance.
Well, and in fact, the interesting thing, and I think if there's a huge win with this strategy, and we shouldn't oversell it, but if there's a huge win, it's coupling it to energy transition and to a kind of Green New Deal, right? Well, actually, you could go a step further and say, we've been incredibly effective in this country at electricity market reform, and the mechanisms, the data, the financing environment. There's more that could be extrapolated from how, when they do a wind tender and you can get all of the data, there are funding mechanisms. There was a green investment bank to provide matching support. This thinking was done within the UK government. It was done brilliantly. We can deliver this. We need to continue to encourage people to see this as an integral part of that transition.
Yeah, although I think selling it to the authors of Britannia Unchained, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, it might be a little difficult, given. But I mean, look, we did it with wind turbines, right? And Guy, you'll remember 4 years ago, I was talking to you about how you could do a critical minerals public-private partnership fund. It's easy to do. It just needs the government to pony up some cash, and get where it didn't happen 4 years ago. Still hasn't happened, but that would be what a lot of other nations are doing. The EU is doing.
Yeah,
so
it's happening in the EU.
Yeah, and Canada, and exactly. Anyway,
and the US hopefully coming forwards. Yep.
Yeah. So, we keep on coming back to finance, which I think is part of the final E of this. The final thing I want to say, though, on the accelerate part, is it talks about education and the importance of education. And this, I know, is something that Lucy has been working on with the working group in the CMA. But if we want to see Camborne back to where it is, we want to see Camborne back to the joke, at the bottom of every mine in the world, there's a Cornishman. Right. We need to get people into Camborne. So it's all well and good getting Camborne funded and getting Camborne supported, but how does the government and with us working together, try and feed the university with people?
Yeah, so, well, just before I jump into this, Dennis and I were lucky enough to be invited to a garden party at the University of Exeter last week, and the Vice-Chancellor, Lisa Roberts, did a fantastic speech and focused a huge amount on the Camborne School of Mines, the potential for it, and how the university want to support it to grow, which is really encouraging to hear, because I think there's perhaps, from an outside perspective, there's been a slightly tricky relationship over the past few years with CSM and where it fits and what it does. So that was really, really encouraging to hear. So I think from an education perspective, it's this multi-pronged approach, isn't it? We need to try and get people who are looking to go to university now, or people who are currently undergraduates who might want to come and do a specialised master's at places like the Camborne School of Mines. I think there's one happening up at St Andrews as well now, critical minerals thing. You know, there's various master's projects that you can do that are interesting. So that's kind of immediate focus. We also need to recruit people to come and do this new mining engineering apprenticeship at the Camborne School of Mines, which is a different way of entering the industry, which I think is really interesting. But unless we manage to go out and tell people about it, then perhaps not going to have the numbers that we're hoping for. And then there's a lot of research out there that suggests that getting kids at kind of key stage 2, key stage 3 is critical, because by the time that you're 13 or 14, you've kind of made up your mind as to whether you're going to be a scientist, an engineer, and, you know, which kind of silo you put yourself in, and then you get into that whole cycle of choosing GCSEs, and if you don't choose the right ones, you can't do, wheel it. So I think it needs this multi-pronged approach. And so I think it's great that the government have said they want to support training the next generation of miners and minerals and things. I think from conversations with teachers, it's very difficult to squeeze anything else into the curriculum. So if we can perhaps, we almost need a pot of money and just have somebody who can coordinate this and go through the curriculum and say, look, this part of chemistry, the circular economy, life cycle assessments, that you can use on minerals projects, we use minerals in this, and just highlight where minerals come from. Because I think one of the problems in the UK is we have got this disconnect between what we're using and where it comes from, and how minerals play such a vital role in all of it. And there's individual companies, there's individual initiatives happening. The Critical Minerals Association, I think we've been doing some really good work through the working group here, but there's nobody coordinating it all, and everybody's doing it kind of on the side of their day jobs. And somebody who's actually got a remit, or a team that have a remit to go out and help deliver curriculum aligned workshops, material that actually talk about critical minerals could be fantastic. And you look at groups such as the Royal Society of Chemistry, the Institute of Engineers, they do brilliant jobs with engineering, chemistry. You know, you have far more people who want to go and be chemical engineers, I believe, than do you want to be geologists, and that seems mad to me. But yeah, it's this multi-pronged approach, I think, and there's a lot we can learn from other industries that have managed to do a brilliant job in engaging young people with what a future career in that might look like. But then the other prong is, if we've got successful projects in the UK, they'll be able to see that as well, whereas it's quite hidden from view at the moment.
Oh. And then we're looking at retention. If we have, you know, if we're producing graduates here, are we retaining them within the UK, or are we sending them to Australia? Which, you know, I think 3 graduates I've worked with in the last year are on the way to Australia in the next few weeks. You know,
the CMA geologist Olympia is over there at the moment. So.
She's coming back though, right?
We sent her in the winter when the weather was bad. So
no, it's coming into nice weather over there at the moment.
Good. But we're at the A, so let's get through the C and the E, and then hopefully we might have time for a few questions at the end. But so the C part of ACE is collaboration. It's about how do we partner, align, or fit ourselves into a global supply chain. And for me, this is quite important. As much as I want to see everything we can do domestically done, we can't do everything. And so where the collaboration part is where do we fit in this global alternative supply chain? Is this recognized? Are there steps that need to be taken?
As always, we could be doing more. I think the oh God, I can't remember the name of the grouping that came out of the Canadian conference this year, between UK, Canada, US, EU, South Korea, Japan, is a great start. Having that kind of government level discussion about what we can do about critical minerals and how we secure our own supplies and how we work with friendly nations to on research and investment and things like that is great. You can see from, and then we're talking about bilateral agreements as well. So hopefully our foreign dignitaries and people are working pretty hard on all that work. But you can see things like the US are working on their Defence Production Act and now looking at direct investments into Canadian projects and Australian projects. We need to be working on things like that, highlight what we can do here, whether it's production or manufacturing, and really going, hey, this is where you could spend some of your money if you want to come and work with our projects. You can source your tin from here.
Yeah, and I think also, one of the points that says is, supporting UK companies to participate in building diversified supply chains overseas. But again, what does that actually look like in practice? Are they providing financial support? Is it a bit of a cheerleading, like, oh yeah, go, we support you investing in projects within this company? Is there some kind of, again, financial incentive for UK companies to go off and develop projects in jurisdictions that we are friendly with, perhaps? So again, it's creating that enabling environment that encourages companies that we know operate to high standards to actually go and develop these projects, because it's something that we need to be really careful of. It's in this kind of global scramble to lock up resources that are going to underpin all of our different energy transitions. There's a danger that because these minerals are so in demand, perhaps people might not develop them with quite as much focus on ESG principles. They're at the heart of what the UK wants to do and how we want to develop these projects. So how do we put something in place to actually encourage those companies who are doing things properly and create an environment that they can go and develop these projects?
One of the things that I think is really interesting when it comes to international cooperation is actually to look at the challenge as well, because in actual fact, it's all very well to say, okay, we've done nothing, for 20 years. We've allowed China to do all of the refining and processing. But you know what? That's over. We'd like to build some EV batteries, so we're going to do it. Well, it's not that easy. The technology hasn't been developed. A lot of the processes are, may not be suited to environmental standards that we would expect to have in the Western world. And, we talk about the circular economy and recycling. This is real cutting edge technology. No one, we have some great companies as it happens in the UK, but it's not as though it's easy to recycle a permanent magnet or an EV battery. And so I think the scale of the challenge in some way opens up the opportunities, because really what would be great application of this strategy would be for us to decide with our allies who is going to do what, how it will fit together, to ensure that we have the technology transfer, to make sure that we're not kind of replicating these unbelievable challenges in developing the technology everywhere. And actually that's probably the way to get competitive with a really, really entrenched competitor in China quickly.
Yeah, and I think something that the UK is very good at is R&D. We are leading. We developed the lithium ion battery in the UK, and we are very good at that R&D. So yeah, how can we make sure that we're then keeping some of that expertise within the UK as these things commercialise to give us that competitive edge? And absolutely so important to touch on the circular economy, because a huge resource of these materials in 5-10 years time is going to be from recycled sources. So that's not easy, because we need to be working with the people who are designing what these batteries look like, so that they can be designed for second life applications, design them so that you can more easily recover the raw materials within them. How can we, would it make sense to have a lithium primary extraction plant next to a lithium recycling plant? Can you use some of the feedstock from one to even up the flow into the other? It's just that thinking outside the box, isn't it? But absolutely, what is our competitive edge when we you know.
Yeah. So it sounds to me then that, you know, and I guess the reality is that we are in a global race. There is a clear leader by a few laps ahead. And instead of racing between friends, we should almost be doing a relay against China, and that's the way that we're going to catch up. And you're starting to see that slightly in the critical mineral lists. I mean, Canada and Canada especially, but Australia as well, their critical mineral lists are not necessarily what they need, but what they have and can provide. And so they are very much aware of they are going to be more upstream, midstream than downstream. I mean, America is going to buy what it can buy. That's just, it will never have enough to, you know, facilitate what it needs to do in the downstream. And on the circular economy, I know it's not necessarily part of the sea, but you know, someone the other day told me they were really happy. They said, "Well, we do circular economy. We get a 2% return on what we put back through our system." And I was like, "You shouldn't be bragging about 2%. You know, we should be hitting 40, 50%. The technology is not there, but it will be in 10 years' time. But what we face right now is if we don't invest in the circular economy now, we're going to be facing the same problem we do today with securing, you know, primary critical minerals in 10 years' time with the circular economy." And so, you know, I feel sorry for the authors of the critical mineral strategy that, you know, this is very much welcomed, and it's very much about how do we get our, you know, past the starting block, only to find that there's, you know, there's a mountain just coming just up the way. So it is hard, but I think collaboration is the only way we're truly going to be able to do this. And part of that is, or for me at least, and maybe it's the political cynic in me, but ESG is the key, right? It's doing things correctly. It's making sure that we provide ESG compliant critical minerals. But what that also does is it creates an alternative market, because you have to be ESG compliant. And that's part of this enhance section. So enhance has for me, there's 3 or 4 different parts of it, but ESG is a key component, and also is finance and empowering the City of London to finance. So do we have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think one of the great insights in the kind of mining sector was Robert Friedland, I think a couple of years ago, making the observation that essentially the future of mining is probably going to be 2 tiers of pricing opening up. So there's always going to be, you know, or at least in the foreseeable future, that there's going to be cheap and dirty minerals that, you know, may or may not be used in refineries somewhere in the world. The question is, will there also be a kind of premium grade which has all of the kind of traceability, the environmental credentials, that is going to go into what OEMs are using to make premium electric vehicles that run in the roads of Europe and North America. And I think if you accept that hypothesis, I think there's good reason to, and also probably good reason to see 2 kind of spheres of influence opening up geopolitically. You know, that's going to create an opportunity, and it's an area clearly the UK is going to have to be associated with the premium category, but I think that's what we should be targeting through all of this planning. And I think it also pushes us, as the EU does the same, to make sure that we integrate with them in how we develop the product and what we put into what we supply to these OEMs.
And it's not like that kind of theory doesn't exist, because, you know, we already started talking about carbon borders. So if we can do the same with an ESG border, you know, and kind of account for maybe cheaper, lower standard production elsewhere versus what we could do here in partner nations, then we can probably, you know, it's not unfeasible.
Yeah, I think the trick comes, there's so many different initiatives, standards, frameworks out there. We definitely don't want to reinvent the wheel. So perhaps a lead from the government could be useful as to which they see as most appropriate. I know it's different because different ones are applicable in different contexts, but I think something we need to be careful of is we don't want to then produce a UK standard for critical minerals projects, ESG or whatever.
Yeah, like, we have international codes, or the basis for international codes for how we report our resources. If we had a basis for a code of how you do ESG, and then come up with national policies based off of those, then that's probably a good start. At the moment, there are, as Lucy said, there are many different varied ways of doing an ESG report, and grading yourself or having someone grade you. I think we definitely need some type of international kind of overall arching way of doing this.
Do you think that should be led by government or by industry? I know it has to be accepted by nations around the world to make it effective, but should it be?
Well, the resource reporting is led by finance, so it's making it responsible financing, and I guess in the same way, it's probably going to be quite similar if we were going to do it the same.
Fair enough. Well, look, we're almost out of time. We've got a few questions that have come in, and if anyone has any questions, do let us know. But I've got a few more questions on my side, just quickly to go through. So the first one is, in the last month, we've seen the US Inflation Reduction Act that has basically put up barriers against those that aren't FTA, in an FTA agreement with the US. And we've also seen the EU Critical Raw Materials Act, and they're starting to pick winners and to strengthen collaboration with other nations. To me, I'm not so concerned with the EU Critical Raw Materials Act. I think that's very much in line with this act as well. I think they're very similar. And I don't necessarily, but the US one could be slightly more concerning given the latest discussions around the UK's likely waiting time for a free trade agreement with the US. So how do you think this strategy overall? And yes, we're waiting for a decision, and I do understand that there's going to be a document that outlines how this is going to be delivered in 2-3 months' time. But how do you think this stacks us or places us in those friendly nations, accepting that China outsmarted everyone 20-30 years ago? How are we? Where are we kind of starting to take our place in that broader competitor?
I think it's a good first step, and it's very much, I see it's very much kind of setting the intention, but I think perhaps we're not as far advanced in how we're going to deliver that and achieve stability around sourcing critical raw materials in a responsible way. I think there's a long way to go.
Yeah, I think when it comes to EU, they're a good market, and they are directing policy towards that. Their work they've done to date on defining what resources they have, and they've spent a lot of money on research. A lot of money on research. Some of that probably research that's very down the line, looking very future, different ways of mining, different ways of production and things like that. When it comes to actually directing money to production in the EU, they're not too far ahead of us in that sense. But yeah, we have a lot of work to do. We are far behind the Australias and the Canadas of the world. We're probably quite far behind the US in the sense. I think there's a lot more we can do, but we can't dawdle about it.
I mean, I completely agree with your read on the EU Critical Raw Materials Act, Jeff. But in actual fact, and this is not in any way a comment about our role in the European Union politically, which is a completely different thing. But actually, when you look at that, when you look at the alignment, and you'd have to say they probably looked at the work that we had done pretty closely. When you look at the trading relationship that we have with that as a block, when you look at the relative kind of mining and raw material use, importation history, availability of resources, I mean, you'd have to say that success is probably going to look like creating whatever else it involves, is going to look like creating an effective relationship so that there is a wider European critical minerals supply chain. I just can't really imagine a scenario where the UK is sitting with a fully integrated critical minerals supply chain, and just, you know, a few miles across the channel that there's another one. So we're going to have to get over whatever we're going to have to get over and work with the EU. I think, you know, you and I last week sat down with the government of Saskatchewan, you know, very, very innovative, forward-thinking province. But, you know, there are many others actually in Canada alone, Quebec, doing some really exciting things. Ontario, you know, obviously one of the great jurisdictions. And so, you know, actually, there's a huge amount we can do. And I think we have to avoid either being too despondent, because we do have great things. And I think Dennis and Lucy have both drawn those out, you know, in this discussion. But we shouldn't be too cocky, because, you know, walking around, you know, at Mines and Money last year, I was asking quite a lot of people, you know, what their view was on the UK's critical minerals approach. And people were kind of saying, you know, there's a role, but you need to show what you're going to bring to it. And that doesn't just mean saying, well, why don't you guys do some mining and provide some finance, and we'll sit in universities and ponder it over. You know, we've got to roll our sleeves up. And I think, you know, we've deliberately probably focused a bit on investment here, because investment is part of what a major economy and a major trading economy should be bringing to the party. And so I think for us to turn up saying, you know, we're not necessarily bringing the same scale of resources, but we're going to think hard on it, you know, that isn't going to cut it ultimately in that kind of international setting.
We're going to signpost it. Yeah.
I mean, so there's a question here from someone watching is what are the top three things that we want to see out of the strategy? And finance, I think we all look and just go finance, because that's, you know, that's what's going to.
I'll give you a new third one: data.
Data.
Yeah.
Okay. This signposting though, what has happened? It looks like the mandate of other funding mechanisms within government have been broadened to accept into that critical minerals, and of course, you know, all of us are less likely to be aware of these, although there are people out there who are part of companies and they are exceptionally more knowledgeable than I am about how to get government funding. So I think broadening those mechanisms is right. But when you have the US throwing over $120 billion at the problem, and you've got the EU now stacked up over the last 2 years, 20 billion plus, Canada, 6 billion plus, you know, it starts to get a little bit tricky to compete financially. So we all agree that finance and mobilizing finance and bringing government finance, but also, you know, utilizing and empowering the City of London has got to be one. Yep. Data is number two from you, Dennis. Are there any others kicking about, any other what we really want to see out of the strategy? I have two ideas, but I'll go last. Dennis, go for it.
Planning and permitting as well. I know Lucy's going to bring up skills as well. That I think that's the definite equal third. But, you know, again, if we can produce the data for the projects and finance the projects, then we've got to get them actually over the board, and then that's got to be planning, permitting, and, you know, we can work within the existing structure as long as the existing structure works. So yeah, there are things for all of those. We've got data, we just don't do it very well. We've got the ability to finance these projects, we just don't do it very well. We've got, you know, a planning permitting structure that is good on environment and community and all of the other things you have to consider to get these projects over the line. We just don't do it very well or quickly.
Okay, so a lot of that is about speeding up and making it easier to progress. And
Yep.
that fits nicely with what the Chancellor was talking about tax, and very much this government's thinking is how do you make things easier, not necessarily changing things, but how do you make it easier to do so. Dennis, you're completely in line with this government, and I didn't think I'd ever say that.
Oh dear.
That's a new one for everyone here. Anyway, Lucy, I'll go to you.
Well, just building on what Dennis said, I think a tangible commitment to how we're going to think about this talent pipeline, because we're not going to be able to deliver these projects if we haven't got the people with the skills to do it. And you know, it's something that we're already, and I'm sure Dennis is finding with his projects, recruiting people who've got the right skills and levels of experience is actually really, really difficult already. So something tangible from the government as to how we can fund and implement that would be really, really useful. And we also shouldn't underestimate the kind of soft power part of, if people are trained at UK universities, whether they come from overseas or whether they come from home, you know, if they're trained in not just the technical aspects, but also the environmental aspects, the social aspects as well, then that's another way of helping us to ensure that these projects globally are going to be delivered in a way that we'd like to see.
And that was a great part from Anglo, you know, directly investing in Cambon for postdoc research into how to add sustainability and life cycle assessments and things into the mining engineering courses. So maybe more assistance or more direction for companies to directly involve themselves in education, and you know, making that easier either through apprenticeships or work placements, which I did a work placement as part of my degree. You know, making that whole system work a little bit better and get kids into education. Absolutely,
but I think at the moment the onus is completely on companies to do it, and there's not really any support. So I think we do need to throw some of it back at the government.
Yep.
Guy, over to you.
So okay, so I think we're to come up with two. So my first one is international collaboration. We all agree on that. The strategy very clearly shows us. What I would like to think is that we cooperate with it's easy, and I hope we are already very much engaging with the people that we like. You know, we love the Canadians, we love the Australians, other than in a cricket context. You know, it appears that some people don't like the Europeans, but you know, as I say, get over it. That is utterly essential. So cooperate with the people that you may have had some difference with as well. I think that will be really, really important. And then the second thing, I think, you know, just so many roads point to recycling as a great area for the UK to put a lot of emphasis in, because I think it plays to our strengths, as Lucy said, like R&D. It also plays to the kind of the sustainability and the differentiator that we can achieve in terms of the manufacturing that is carried out here. And I also think it's a really good, because of those features of the UK, I think it's a really good area where we can collaborate effectively with our international partners. So I could easily see technology transfer, joint projects with you know, Canadian businesses and provinces, for example. And so I think it just kind of ticks so many of those boxes for where the UK can thrive in critical minerals. And, you know, in all fairness, I think that, you know, it's pretty well signposted. That's not the term. It's well identified in the strategy. And so, you know, let's crack on. Let's really get behind it. Let's put some money behind it, you know, if that's not a dirty word, and yeah, make that work for us.
Brilliant. Thank you, Guy. So Nick, I saw your comment and the need to better inform society as well as people, and you know, highlighting the GeoBus and the work that they do on educating and in, you know, entertaining kids and getting them in. I completely agree. On my side, yes, it's collaboration. So I saw that Hiroki-san is with us from JOGMEC, and you know, the likes of working with the Japanese on rare earth supply chains has got to be key. And part of that is diplomacy, right? So how do we, now that we are a global Britain, how do we identify countries that wouldn't have been at the front of the list, the likes of perhaps Ghana, and say, right, you actually have critical minerals that we need. How do we build a relationship with you very quickly to go? And how do we empower companies to go and run operations abroad? So for me, because we can't do all of it domestically, we've got brilliant projects domestically, but there will be other things we can do, and they can be done by British companies who are therefore naturally more aligned into reselling into the UK or the EU. So that would be part of it for me. And the other part for me would be around ESG and just the importance of putting that at the heart and center of everything. Because I've said it multiple times, we can't build a better, greener future if we accept irresponsibility today. It defeats the point. So how do we make that front and center? How do we deliver that? We've run out of time. I think we could have probably spoken about this for another two months if we really got into it. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you ever so much, Lucy, Dennis, and Guy. Are there any last final thoughts from any of you?
Like to see what comes next, basically, and hopefully we get I know Guy's involved in the creation of the strategy, but I think a lot of the companies would like a lot more say and a lot more input into how this is developed, and hopefully, especially on the UK side, how this goes forwards. Brilliant.
Okay, I will leave it there. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Lucy, Guy, Dennis. I think broadly everyone is very supportive of this. This is a great step forwards. Seeing how that's determined and delivered will be key. But I think that's where organisations like the CMA, companies like Cornwall Resources, Cornish Lithium, and technical experts and lawyers like Guy can help the government bring this to life and deliver it in a way that can be done quickly, accelerate the way that we get these projects and find those supply chains. So huge opportunity. We just now have to take it.